Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today. Don't lose your head, the case for the all-in-one DXP. So Kamruz, Jaman, my partner at Konabos and partner in crime, is going to present. So Kamruz, all yours.
Thanks, Akshay. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hopefully you find some interesting info. But I want to make the case for the all-in-one DXP. This is something that I had presented at the Boy & Co CMS Connect 24 last month in Montreal. Really great event. Got some really good feedback from that as well, and it was also really great feedback from industry-wide professionals and peers. So that did make me a little bit happy, and gave me a little bit more confidence to present this all to you. So my name is Kamruz Jaman, for those of you that don't know me. I'm one of the founders here at Konabos, along with Akshay. I've been in the CMS and DXP space for over 15 years now. I am also a 12-time Sitecore MVP and a Content.ai MVP. I have been in the IT industry development space for 25 years almost now. Started as an intern way back in the year 1999, 2000. And like most people my age, I guess, I was tinkering in products such as Microsoft Front Page, Homesite, Dreamweaver, the original Jamstack creation tools, if you like. I started as a full stack developer, so I was working in classic ASP as it's known now, but I would do the back-end coding, the front-end coding. I would be the BA, I'd be the analyst, I'd be everything, right? But these days, I'm more of a solution level architect, working at working mostly with enterprise customers. But my introduction into the CMS space came in around 2009 when I started for a little agency in London called Precept, and we got introduced to the Sitecore system at the time, Sitecore 6 in those days. Prior to that, I'd worked with some homebrew CMSs, but it was mostly application development that I was doing, as well as websites, but more generated statically. A little bit about Konabos. So hopefully a lot of you know us from the space, but Konabos was founded in 2018, and we're a group of digital solution specialists. We provide end-to-end services, including development, training, design, UX, CI, strategy, project management, etc. So we are a full end-to-end digital agency, but hopefully a lot of you know us from the community. We do love to share our knowledge and our experience, our learnings and our failings, and yeah, it's great to share that with you guys and to get that feedback as well. We thrive on feedback, so again, any feedback you have from this presentation and what you guys have also been noticing in the industry, we'd love to hear that as well. So we have been working in the headless space as well for a number of years, and last year we won a Mark Impact Award for Best Overall Change Project for one of our clients, American Bath Group. We're using a whole host of technology, composable products in this solution, but there was it was a huge, as the award implies, overall change project. This was a huge shift in the organization, in the way that we had been previously implemented, in the way that their solutions had previously implemented, and the way we had been implementing it with this composable stack, the end-to-end integration with their business units, their production teams, their customer teams, their partners, and their B2B partners, as well as this type of solutions. So the website itself, as well as other products such as kiosks and devices and mobile applications. So The case for, this is where I'm going to make the case for the all-in-one DXP, having just talked about composable and headless, a little bit of a shift in gear, and where I feel the all-in-one traditional DXPs still make a lot of sense and bring a lot of value for a lot of customers. Now, when we talk about monolith, just the word monolith, when you're thinking, when someone says the word monolith to you, what comes into your mind? And what you're going to think of is something which is big, something which is old, something which is ancient, something which is almost immovable. There's no flexibility in this system or this monolith. There's nothing you can do about it. But when we talk about the word headless or composable, what we're thinking is something which is small, something which is lightweight, something which is nimble, something which is very agile, and something which is very, very modern, right? The words headless and monolith almost kind of invoke a good versus a bad connotation, at least in my mind, from what I've been seeing with all the different articles, the different marketing material. Is always almost like if you're going monolith, then it's a bad choice. This is a very old system. It's never done good for anyone. Whereas headless is this new sunlit uplands, and it's going to provide you all the agility to, move your business forward. And it's the obvious choice, right, from all the marketing materials that you hear. But these words matter, right? So when we're using these words to describe things, just the word itself, monolith, that choice of word matters. But then when we talk about these all-in-one systems, there are some systems where you will say, hey, you know what? An all-in-one system makes a lot more sense than this composable system, right? I don't want 15 different things doing this thing that this one thing over here can do. One of the things that comes to my mind is, I don't know if you guys have seen this advert. I'm sure you've seen this doing the rounds on the internet. There's this advert where this Radio Shack advert from I think it's 1991 or something like that, I believe. It's got all of these products on there, and this is my composable analogy, whereas the all-in-one is your iPhone or your smartphone. It can do every single thing on this Radio Shack advert from your one device. So which is better in this case? Are you going to have these 15 products, or do you want this one handheld device that's with you that can do all of these things for you? So again, we're not going to call the iPhone a monolith, right? But it is an all-in-one in comparison to having lots of separate systems. So the first point coming up is when we talk about headless, headless is not mean composable. I can be composable and not be headless. I don't necessarily require. Headless is a feature. It's a feature that we have been likening to composable because they often go hand in hand, but they are not the same thing, right? I can be headless and not be. I can be composable and not be headless, and vice versa, right? I can just have a headless system which just serves up a website and not necessarily be composable at the same time. Composable is about the use of multiple different systems to build your stack to solve the problem. And for a lot of us, we've been doing this for a very long time. We've been composable even with on top of our traditional monolithic type systems. We also hear a lot from the marketing perspective that the future is composable or the future is headless. You have to be headless, you have to be composable in order to be ready for what is to come. But headless is not the only future. As I said, you can be on a traditional monolithic type system, these all-in-one DXPs, and still be composable, still integrate with the different MarTech stacks, the different systems that you need to build your solution. And again, this marketing talk always reminds me of this famous quote by Henry Ford, where when he was talking about the Model T and somebody asked him, can I have it in a different color? And he said, yes, you can have it in any color that you like, as long as it's black. Again, there's a narrative that everyone has to be headless and everyone has to be following the composable approach, but it's not a must for everybody. So your traditional CMSs, again, they would handle everything. Your database, the code, the plugins. They would run some logic in the backend code. They would serve up some HTML. They would serve up the media, the CSS, templates, everything that is needed to give a response to the customer. And we can integrate those traditional systems with lots of other systems, right? So there's a lot of projects we've worked on where we've integrated with external DAMs, external SSO systems. We obviously, Google Analytics is the one that's been there since the dawn of time. But we can also feed in other systems such as HubSpot, for example, if you want to be adding in sign-up forms or other landing pages, for example, and all of that can then be handled by HubSpot, and then the downward integrations if you have some sort of an iPaaS system, such as Zapier, for example, or Cycle Connect, then that can also be handled from HubSpot. And you notice that we talk about a responsive output here. So your output from your traditional system, as would be best practice, should be responsive in terms of CSS and the JavaScript and the functionality, which can then be handled on multiple different devices, your mobile, your tablet, your desktop, and sometimes even embedded systems where if you just actually need something displayed in a semi-interactive form, it's just a screen in most devices, even on your fridge. If it can be opened in a browser, then it can be displayed even on that fridge. But sometimes that fridge is not an important device for you, and your output is just responsive. You're not outputting to a separate mobile app, and so those composable, those headless elements might not actually be that important for you. You might not even have the need for omnichannel. So you can still be all-in-one monolith and still be composable. The other important aspect is your team composition. What I mean by that is who is actually on my team that is going to be using the systems that we are building. The size of the team does matter. We work with a lot of enterprise. We do work with a lot of enterprise customers. The American Bath Group that I just mentioned is a huge, huge organization. But we also work with smaller enterprise customers where maybe the entire organization is just a couple of hundred people, and then the size of the team that's managing the web assets is just a handful of people. Sometimes it's just 4 people, sometimes it's a dozen people. But they are the one team that is actually doing everything. They don't have a separate team that manages their PIM. They don't have a separate team that's managing the DAM. They don't have a separate team that's managing their commerce solution, and they don't have a separate team that's managing the website assets. Sometimes it's the one team that's doing everything, and they need a tech stack familiarity. They don't have the time or the luxury even to be jumping across 4 or 5 different systems in this composable stack to be able to doing these things. They don't have these separation of their job effectively. They are the ones who are running end to end, and they need to be agile and nimble within one system. So again, having a single neck to choke, a single system that they can do everything within, where they can manage the website, where they can manage the content that goes with it, the workflows of that content end to end, the digital assets that go with that, and also if there's any personalization scenarios within that they need to be managing that within one tool and not 4 or 5 different tools. And then the skill set of your team as well really does matter. So a lot of the teams we do work with, the website or the web assets is not the only job that they have to do. They are often also managing other backend systems, custom systems, sometimes integrations. But a lot of these custom solutions have been built in the same tech stack as what their current website tech stack is. So if you're a customer that's been on a .NET tech stack, I'm from a .NET background myself, although I have worked with React and Next.js, for example, but my traditional background has been .NET. And when I was working at these enterprise customers, I was working at enterprise customers myself as an employee, our tech stack was the one we were familiar with. So when we had to build an integration, when we had to build a synchronization process, when we had to build a custom application, it was built in C#. So if that team has to continue managing their business as usual processes. So if you're now moving to a headless system, the majority of these headless systems are built using React, Next.js, Vue, Svelte, whatever your JavaScript-based framework of choices, that will require that team to reskill. And I know it's very easy to say, hey, you can just learn X, Y, and Z, but it's a lot harder than it seems, because you still have your business as usual. You still have to manage those .NET-based applications. So sometimes, and again, oftentimes the tech stack of your DXP does matter as a result, and just moving to headless is usually of a bigger concern for those teams. The infrastructure changes with that. You have a whole new shift to the paradigm of how your infrastructure is hosted and managed, how those SaaS systems work, and you interact with those. You still have to manage. Oftentimes, you still have to manage those front-end Netlifys, Vercels, and then those integrations back into your back-end systems. And it's a big shift. So your infrastructure team also needs to now change with that. And it is a relearning. It is a concern. Change is hard. I mentioned the single integrated tool. It is a big issue for singular teams. But sometimes your business requirements are actually very low. You don't already have an internal that you're using. So you are actually able to oftentimes change your internal processes a little bit to meet what the tool can do. And then oftentimes the tool itself can be customized a bit further as well. So that is also a consideration that you need to make within that choice. And in terms of skill set, I don't know if this is an old article by Scott Hanselman. It's really worth a read. And this is, I think it's from around 2012, and it's something that Scott Hanselman terms as dark matter developers. And when we are seeing our social media, our LinkedIn feeds, or Twitter, we're always talking about new technologies, right? Brand new stuff, bleeding edge stuff, cutting edge stuff. And this article goes on to talk about, even back then, what he deems dark matter developers. There's a huge host of developers and IT folk who are not on social media, but are not blogging, are not putting their opinion into every single thing that they're coming across. They're just there in the background, just getting stuff done using tried and tested technologies and things that they know, and they're delivering huge amounts of business value. And at the time, I think he was talking about AS400 and COBOL programmers. That's obviously slowly shifting, but we all know there's still huge amounts of AS400 and systems and COBOL programmers out there, just out there keeping those systems going, delivering huge value, continue to deliver huge value to those customers, particularly in those manufacturing space. We've seen this a lot. I'm not saying become an AS400 or a COBOL programmer, but again, don't knock off old, what you deem old technology just because it's not on the cutting edge or the bleeding edge. Also, we know that speed matters. Lighthouse scores really do matter, and composable and headless, the headless approach does help with this. It definitely helps with performance. It's not going to help you with accessibility, and it's not going to help you with SEO just off the bat, because those are things that you need to have built into your design systems, your UX, your actual philosophy to begin with. But performance, we know, can be improved hugely by headless. But I also know that HTML is very lightweight, right? Next.js and single page apps is not the only way to achieve good performance scores. HTML itself is very light. As part of this, I was trying to get some examples of why I feel HTML is lightweight, and I went to apple.com. And the initial page load of apple.com is 6.7 megabytes. But of that 6.7, only 45 kilobytes is actually the HTML that's delivered. And it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. 45K in this day and age is very small amount of data. What's adding to that is all what I deem the bloatware that goes on with that. So your images, your videos, your CSS, your JavaScript, your 15 different trackers, JavaScript trackers that you're adding to this page. This is not going to help you, right? Those JavaScript trackers are just going to slow down the page. They're going to add more weight. They in turn will load a bunch of things. Apple does do some good practices, whereas you scroll the page, it lazy loads in some additional, the images and things like that. And these are just good HTML practices. They're good practices if you want to achieve good performance scores, right? Deliver some lightweight HTML, deliver the minimum set of CSS, JavaScript to make that initial render, and then lazy load in everything else that you need. Use CDNs. CDNs exist. We can't pretend they don't exist. So use CDNs and use the maximum cacheability of your static assets that you can, and that's going to help you with all of these performance issues, or some of the performance issues, and help you with global scalability in delivering those. And then you can also look at some newer frameworks like HTMX. So if you're on that traditional server, ASP.NET, for example, it could be PHP, it could be Java. If you're using those traditional server-side technology sets, look at technologies like HTMX to give you some of that responsiveness within your application. It's going to be easier for us traditional back-end developers to implement and to integrate, and it gives the front-end guys also some fun to give them some of that responsiveness and front-end technology-wise. But what matters for a lot of our customers is actually time to market. That's one of these elements. The lighthouse scores matter, but time to market is also one of the biggest drivers of when we talk about speed. Business wants their ideas, their changes delivered right now, and the faster you can do that, the better it's going to be. And it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter whether that's done in React or Java or PHP or .NET. There are other issues at play that why that process is slow oftentimes. Complexity. Composable is hard. It's often touted as this like dream that it's going to it's going to be a silver bullet. It's going to solve all of these other problems, but it's not, right? Composable is hard, and gluing together. I want to say gluing together in quotes because I know people will hate me for that word. Gluing together these composable systems is hard, right? You're introducing lots of different systems. You want to bring in some sort of an API layer, and you got to figure that out. The first time you do this, or the first few times you do this, it's going to be hard. Having gone through this, and this is where agencies, that agency knowledge and experience is going to matter. Having gone through this a few times, we've learned a lot as we've gone through this process. If I was working directly on the customer side, and this was the first time I'm doing this, I'm going to get a lot of things wrong. And this was the same when I did my first ever CMS project on Cycle, for example. We got a lot of things wrong. That experience does matter. So yeah, just be careful of that. That there is additional complexity in composable. There is additional complexity in the infrastructure as you're now going to manage it. It's not just a single system. It's multiple different systems. It's microservices that you're using. You need to now start thinking about security when you're accessing your internal systems. You need to think about security of your REST points as well, and what data they in turn are going to access, and what data they are going to expose. So there are more endpoints and things like that you need to start thinking about, and start thinking about the security of, because traditionally you could kind of get it, you could obscure that, right? Because you're only delivering some HTML and some images and some static assets. You could obscure all of this behind your servers. It's your server that you need to secure, and what that in turn accesses, you can add in additional security. But now your end users are going to be able to access some of these endpoints, and you're exposing more of them. And there is a microservice tax that goes with it. You're thinking differently now. You're having to think about lots of different endpoints, lots of different systems, lots of different microservices, and how all of that fit together in the grand scheme of your solution. Along with that, there is we are seeing a lot of vendor fatigue. There are a lot of different systems that you're going to have to think about and bring into your solution to solve this problem. If you already have these solutions in place, you're already using these within your organization, then it's actually a very easy transition. Some customers we've worked with, they already have well-defined systems and processes that they were using, and actually the traditional monolithic systems was a hindrance and a burden on them, because those were very, very difficult to integrate for them into those traditional systems, whereas headless and composable solve this problem for them. But for others where you don't have those systems already defined, going out and solving and vetting vendors and looking at demos and trying to find which one will fit and which one won't fit, going through POCs to see, only to find out something actually doesn't fit, gets a little bit annoying, and you do end up with a lot of vendor fatigue at the end of it. Along with that, for some of the larger organizations, the legal vetting, the legal process to get these vendors onboarded, and then to go through the entire procurement processes, getting contracts signed, can sometimes be a very, very long process. And as a result, some of these enterprises are just choosing to go with vendors that are already being procured and onboarded, or use a solution that they're not going to have to go outside of their immediate realm. Debugging is a fun one, and when you have one system, it's quite easy to follow the track of what happens to this request as it goes through end to end, from the user request coming in to the multiple different systems it might touch in the back end. But when you're dealing with composable, it does become more difficult, because you're now having to debug 5 different streams into 5 different systems and see, trying to figure out where is the error occurring. Just something to bear in mind. Debugging is never a fun one, and when you have multiple systems, it gets a little bit tricky, and it's not fun. And caching, right? Caching in our computer science world is always hard, right? There's that famous quote: there are 2 hard things in computer science, naming things and cache invalidation. And it's not any, caching is also in a composable world and a headless world. When you're making changes in your headless CMS in the back end, and then it's Vercel or Netlify or wherever you're hosting, is your front end is caching that. When you want to see those changes, you're having to deal with the caching yourself, or having to build in these mechanisms to either reset the caching in on a certain timer, or building the mechanism to go out and invalidate those caching. caching for a lot of these traditional all-in-one systems is something that has just been, it's just been dealt with. It's already built into the system. It's baked into the system. And when I was talking about vendor fatigue, it always blows my mind when I see this MarTech map and of the many different choices of all the different solutions for all the different products. Even in the past few years, I feel like this, the number of headless CMS vendors, the number of DAM systems, the number of personalization systems, the number of integration systems has just, I learn about one almost every week, and it's just mind blowing as to how, if you're a small organization, this is a minefield and that you have to kind of navigate if you want to go into the composable world and you don't already have a tech stack or a large part of that tech stack that you're using. And I don't know if you guys have seen this tweet from Elon Musk back in 2022, just after he took over Twitter and X, and he was talking about essentially the microservice tax, where they split out things into heaps of different microservices, and it really wasn't making any difference, but was just adding a lot of engineering overhead. And one of the things I've heard is if you're not solving a problem at a Netflix size, then you probably don't need microservices. But we've also seen a lot of cases of organizations that are actually moving away from microservices and back towards what they deem to be modular monoliths. I mean, it's not always going to be a good idea for everybody to follow this modular monolith approach even. But again, microservices also isn't going to be a good idea for everybody. It's not always going to solve the problems that you think it's going to solve. So again, just pay attention and see, do I actually need to solve this problem, or am I just introducing microservices because that's what everybody's telling me I need to introduce? Self-hosting is, again, I know it's frowned upon these days, but it does come up as a requirement and we've seen it as a requirement for some of our customers. They want to be able to host their solution on-prem within their own data center, even within their own cloud subscription, right? So they might have an Azure or an AWS subscription, and they want to be hosting it within that subscription itself. And when you're going down the SaaS-based systems, that oftentimes isn't an option, right? It's hosted on, the vendor hosts it, and that's the beauty. They will host it, they will manage it, they will upgrade it for you, they will do everything for you, they will scale it for you and everything else. And I do agree with that, but oftentimes it's not our choice. The customers have a requirement, and sometimes it may be a security policy that they have to host it themselves, and sometimes it's not a choice. So we have certain customers that are located within Canada, for example, and for them, the data has to reside within Canada. And some of the headless systems that we've been looking at or been using, they don't have the option to host it within Canada region data centers. It'll be within North America data centers, which is, from a location-wise, it's fine, but from a policy-wise for that particular customer, it's not fine. So we don't have a choice. So having at least the option to self-host at least gives us additional options for those customers. We just need to keep it simple at the end of the day. Whatever options we're picking, whatever solutions we're picking, keep it simple, and keep it simple for those customers, because these are long-term investments, and sometimes if you're adding complexity and introducing complexity where it doesn't really give much benefit, it's not going to be an advantage for that particular customer. Total cost of ownership, because this is one that comes up a lot, especially when talking SaaS-based systems. But what we often don't look at when we talk about cost of ownership, or we don't pay much attention to, is API limits. Is the first one I'm going to bring up. Most of these SaaS-based headless systems have specific API limits, and you might look at those limits and say, wow, that's huge. It's like 10 million API requests a month. I'm never going to be able to hit that. And then you go and hit that, and then you have the cost of overages. This is something that we have hit when we first got into looking at headless. We had designed things in ways that we had designed things in the past, and we hadn't really thought about API limits, because if I'm going and hitting a database that's hosted in my own instance, I don't really care if I hit that a little bit frequently. I mean, I do performance-wise, but I don't from a I don't have a SQL call limit, right? What I'm looking at is CPU limits and resource limits, and if I'm not hitting those, then that's fine. I'm looking at response times, but pay attention to those API limits. When we did this, we were not aggressive enough with our caching strategies. We learned this the hard way. We hit these massive API limit overages. Thankfully, we were working with a very thoughtful and good partner, Concept AI, and we figured something out to manage this, and we weren't penalized heavily as a result of this. But they worked with us to go and figure out where the calls were, where we can make those optimizations. So if you are going down this route, in any case, down the headless route, pay attention to those API limits and those, because it can bite you very, very quickly. And we're also seeing more and more with Next.js, with Netlify, with Vercel, that they are making much more heavy use of middlewares, particularly for functionality. And again, you have limits on the number of calls you can make for the middleware and those edge computing. Again, pay attention to those, because particularly with the middleware, you're going to be making those calls every single request, or almost every single request, and they start to add up very, very quickly. And it can be very, very difficult to take all of these into account especially when you're new into this world, and you don't know exactly what's going to be an overage and what's going to be an API call, what's going to be an edge function call, how many of these am I going to call. It can be quite difficult to calculate. And on total cost of ownership, also, I think one thing we don't look at is the cost of the business costs and the opportunity costs, because if you're moving to these new, particularly when you're looking to re-platform completely, there is an inherent business cost and an opportunity cost there, where if you want re-platforming, you could be using that time to be looking at new marketing initiatives, for example. If you're going to be doing a big rebrand, for example, then that is an ideal time to look at re-platforming, and that's often the case when we look at these things. But we're also hearing cases where people are just looking to re-platform for the sake of re-platforming. And this old image came back. I love this old image from several years back when cloud became a very, very big thing. And just because we're moving to serverless doesn't mean that there is not some computing involved. I mentioned those edge functions and those middleware functions. When we first started on our headless journey, we were taking the Jamstack paradigm, where we would statically build out websites and deploy those, and brings me back to those front page and those Dreamweaver days where we'd create a website statically, manually, but statically, and then we would FTP those up to some sort of a server. The Jamstack approach was similar to that, and then we'd kind of build up functionality, progressive enhancement, we used to call it in those days, by layering on some JavaScript functionality, some calls to probably not in the early days, not calls to APIs, and then you build up your mobile, your CSS and imagery and things like that, for example. But yeah, again, it's somebody else's computer. It's going to cost you money. Scalability is a big benefit of headless composable approach, and the geoscaling capabilities, the edge computing scalabilities gives you these quick response times. Functionality is being calculated closer to the closest node to that user, and they get a very quick response time. But This reduces huge amounts of latency as well on the systems that matter. But I think one thing the customers have to ask themselves is, do you actually care about geoscaling? We work with customers that truly do need geoscaling. They serve customers in every single market across the globe. We also have customers that serve one very specific customer. And I'm not just talking North America, I'm talking about very specific states, like maybe even just the northeast region of North America. We even have one customer that predominantly serves one city in Canada. Do they care about geoscaling? I mean, not really. What they want to do is serve their local market and serve their local market very, very well. There may be some outliers there where they get somebody who's visiting from out of province, out of state, because they're traveling, they're visiting, maybe they're looking up something for a relative, for example. So I mean, take that into consideration, but that do look at your traffic, the stats, your Google Analytics to see what market are you serving, and where do you need to make that experience the richest. If you don't need that global scalability, then maybe you're overcomplicating things right now. And then do take into account that if you have some internal systems, some internal databases that what you're serving up needs to access, it doesn't matter if you're using edge functions. There's still going to be some latency involved there, because that edge function is going to need to call back to your internal system, and that internal system, maybe it's just in the Washington data center, Microsoft data center is where you host it. That edge function needs to call back to that data center, but you also need to now secure that endpoint. So you're going to want to use something like the cell secure compute, so that the only instance that can access that database or that backend API you have is that one IP that you have. Because if you're just using regular edge functions, then it's the IP address range just changes all the time. So you need to then restrict that down. And then when you're using something like the cell secure compute, it's hosted in a specific region with a specific IP address. So again, you remove the benefit of that edge functions. And again, it's going to be depending on what you're doing or what you're not doing, right? And on each particular call, if it's just specific to some member functionality, then maybe you're okay with the members logged in, and they're going to see a slight delay as a result of that. Which brings me on to the monoliths, right? And we know that the traditional monoliths have been notoriously difficult to upgrade, and as a result, the cycles that it takes for you to see that it takes for you to see new features being added are often quite long. Usually they're annual releases, yearly releases, and for you, given how quickly the modern technology is moving, that might be quite long and quite slow. And of course, right now, every single person and every single company wants to launch out all of their AI-powered capabilities, right? This is a big marketing push, and we're seeing that with every single CMS vendor. So which brings me on to what I deem to be the modern era of SaaS-based all-in-one DXPs. And what I want to call out is, and the majority of these here at least are .NET Core based. Unsurprisingly, because I'm, given my .NET background, we've been working with systems like Experience by Kentico. Umbraco has been around for a very, very long time, but it's now .NET Core based. Same with Optimizely, which was Episerver. Also a .NET Core based system. .cms is an all-in-one DXP. Java based, I believe, but you can also work with it with other technology sets just due to its APIs. But these solve some of the pain points that we had with these traditional monolithic systems. And this is why this is why I would not deem these to be monoliths. These are also SaaS-based solutions. You can just pay them the money and they will host it for you. You can also take your choice and host it yourself if that is a requirement. They're extremely easy to operate because they're these .NET-based systems where you just reference one NuGet package, and then Experience by Kentico, for example, will release what they call monthly, which is new functionality every single month, and they have a very, very well-defined roadmap, and you can see what's coming up in the next 3 months, what's in the longer-term roadmap. Obviously, go pester them and get them to bump up the priority of some of those. They will host the solution for you. They will deal with the scaling. They will deal with the security. So if there's any patches that need to go out, they will go ahead and patch that system for you. And we have also seen with these types of systems, because they're .NET core based, that it does solve some of the issues that we had with the traditional systems with our front-end processes. These .NET systems will actually also run on a Linux system or a MacBook directly without, and so the developers can be involved in that process without having these separate repositories and broken down processes. I also do want to call out Sitecore, particularly their XM Cloud offering, and also Uniform. If you guys haven't looked at those, do take a look at those. I'm going to shout these out as the original composable monoliths, I'm going to call them. Sitecore, Uniform, they both provide headless and composable products. They follow all of the modern guidelines for what I would deem headless. But they have a suite of products which are already integrated, so you're not having to do the glue work and the piecing together. So Sitecore has offerings for what they call XM Cloud, which is your content solution, your CMS, personalization through Sitecore Personalize, CDP for gathering of customer data in the background. They have Content Hub for the DAM solution, Sitecore Search for the search integration. And Uniform has a number of products around the CMS personalization and their mesh system as well for integration of backend systems. So it's not the traditional, what I deem the all-in-one DXP, but I'd say these are the kind of traditional all-in-one composable systems with full integration. And so when I talk about what I do, what I had been calling internally the Goldilocks paradox, where things are either too big or too small, or not quite right. Not too integrated, not integrated enough, and now what we're seeing is things are just right. The industry has been deeming these as headless, hybrid headless, and even the new term of universal CMS. People are visual. Unsurprisingly, it's one of the reasons I got into web development. I like development, but I didn't like traditional development. I like visual elements. I like the HTML, CMS, CSS, JavaScript, and unsurprisingly, people also like to build pages visually. They like to add components. They like to edit the content. They like to look at the content hierarchy. Vercel introduced in Next.js some important features a little while back. I've seen that as last year for live edits to your CMS. I think Sanity, from what I understand, Sanity is the only one that's back integrated this into their CMS. But lots of other CMSs have visual editors. Contentful has had a visual editor for a little while. Content Stack just yesterday announced their visual builder. All of these headless systems traditionally were just content. There was no editing, there's no preview, there's no visual aspect to these. And just a few weeks ago, Contentful also just acquired Ninetailed, which is a personalization product, which integrated directly into Contentful's visual builder. Because again, people are seeing that these separate systems become difficult. People are visual. People like to do the things that they're doing for the web. They would like to do that all within one platform, all within one solution, and they want the single tool to handle all of those use cases. And we also seem to, and it's a bit long-standing, right? We also seem to deem people into buckets of technologists and marketers. And I think as developers, as technologists, as implementers, we need to think about who are we actually building this system for? And it's the CMS systems, DXPs that we're building are actually, in my mind, we're not actually, as implementers, we're not actually building for the end users. And we're definitely not building for the developers a lot of the times, right? What we're actually building for is the marketers and the content authors. They're the ones who are going to be using our implementation day in, day out. They're going to be spending way more time in this system than a developer will be, right? Using it day to day, and even an end user will be. It's going to be the content author's job is probably going to be 8 hours a day to go into this system. So think about them when you're building these solutions, and what is going to work best for them. Is it going to be a headless composable system? Is it going to be an all-in-one DXP, which can also deliver headlessly, by the way? They do have omni-channel capabilities. Is your team actually ready to work with different systems? And also, when you're looking at new systems, just bear in mind, is the problem our DXP or is it our actual implementation? Because we've seen this a lot as well, where people will blame the system, but actually it was your implementation that was not done well, wasn't following best practices, or the implementation didn't fit the needs of your business and your content authors. We've seen that a lot as well, even down to how the content models, the templates are designed, make sure it actually fits the flow of your content authors and how they are working and how they need to get their job done. Headless and composable is not going to be a silver bullet. And almost at the end, I just want to, I don't know if you guys have heard this story, that in the 60s, NASA kind of, as a doing space exploration for the first time, they discovered that ballpoint pens do not work in zero gravity. So to combat this problem, NASA scientists spent a decade and $12 billion to develop a pen that writes in zero gravity, upside down, underwater, and in almost any surface at any temperature from below freezing to 300 degrees Celsius. And the Russians used a pencil. Now, this is an urban myth, and actually the pen was developed by a private firm called the Fisher Pen, but you've probably heard of the NASA Space Pen. It's a great story. It's a great myth. I love this myth because when you are considering composable and the need for best of breed, and looking at, I need the best system for all of this. First, look at and evaluate whether you actually need to follow this route. Do I need a space pen when actually a pencil will do? Maybe for our business, an all-in-one DXP is actually going to be the right tool for us at this moment in time and the foreseeable future. And with that, I would love to take some questions.
There's only one so far. How do you determine as an organization that all-in-one DXP is the right solution for you? How do you assess when it might be the time to move to fully composable from all-in-one?
Yep. And actually, I think you and I both talked about this before. Before picking a product, before picking a technology set, do some road mapping. Sit down with your business, sit down with the stakeholders, look at where you are, what you want to achieve, how you get there, and what that looks like. And through that journey, that might be, it might be that you discover that, yes, you know what, we need to go to a composable solution. It's going to really, really help us. It's going to improve our business processes. You might also find that, this other DXP with some slight tweaks and customizations is going to be really, really a good fit for us. And go in with an open mind Don't look at your traditional DXPs that you may have been working with. Look at some of these modern offerings, because we have found it to solve a lot of the pain points that we had with traditional DXPs.
Makes sense. That's the only question I see, Kamruz. If you guys have any other questions, just post them in the comments and we'll try to answer that back to you. Thank you so much for joining this webinar.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, as I actually said, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and DM me or email us, and I'll get back to you with something, right?